The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, commonly referred to as NATO, is a military alliance made up of 30 countries in North America and Europe, which are known as member states. NATO plays an important role in international affairs, maintaining peace, freedom, and political security, and has helped resolve distress in these areas, such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, and more. They are a helpful supplement to conflict-seeking resolution. However, while functioning alone, NATO has found less success due to their disorganization and sluggish commitment. The North Atlantic Treaty states that the primary objective of the organization is to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of the peoples, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and rule of law. In joining NATO, countries forfeit their nuclear weapons in exchange for the promise of protection from non-allied countries. Article 5 of the Washington Treaty states that an armed attack against one or more of them should be considered an armed attack against them all. It is this promise that continues to unite the international forces. Together, these countries have a greater chance to prosper economically because each does not have to worry about maintaining large conventional armies. NATO was founded on the promise of guarding the Allies' freedom and security by any means necessary, whether through political or military means. NATO is the only security that binds transatlantic communities together, finding strength in shared values, and serves as the permanent link between North America and Europe's security. As the organization grows, NATO's goal becomes close to being complete, creating a unified and safe Europe. On a political level, NATO promotes democratic values and encourages the member states to cooperate on defense and guarantee each other's safety. If diplomatic measures fail to resolve a conflict, NATO is prepared to intervene with military resources, which are funded by each member state's contribution of a small percentage of their military budget. Due to many international threats over history, Article 4 was written, which ensures that allies must consult amongst themselves to reach an agreement before they take action on what military measure to pursue. NATO has stayed true to its values and aims to achieve peace among international communities. In 1949, following the Second World War, NATO was founded. It started with 12 countries and has since grown to harbor 30. Currently headquartered in Brussels, NATO was created by the United States, Canada, and some Western European countries under the threat of Soviet attack following the end of World War II. The fundamental goals of NATO are summed up in the Washington Treaty, also known as the North Atlantic Treaty. Overall, NATO manages to maintain transatlantic bonds and generally helps countries veer away from major conflict. While NATO's interventions aim to improve security and quality of life in active areas, their weaknesses often overshadow the effectiveness of their missions. Following the Soviet advance into Afghanistan and the resolution of the dispute, the Bosnian War broke out on the 6th of April, 1992. Many peace treaties would fail during this war because of the Bosnian Serbs' overwhelming reluctance to surrender any land. Following this, the UN would instruct NATO to carry out operations on the offensive and defensive, mainly focusing on airstrikes. This war was the first time NATO troops were deployed into a country for conflict resolution. Not only did they shut down Bosnian airspace throughout this period, NATO for the first time in history went on the offensive in Operation Deliberate Force, in which they sent air raids over the army of Republika Srpska, which posed a danger to UN safe areas. The Bosnian War was also the first time NATO deployed peacekeeping troops, which are used to protect civilians and reduce civil unrest in communities. On the 20th of December, 1995, the NATO-led Implementation Force was established, a group tasked with enforcing the Dayton Accords, which is the peace treaty of the Bosnian War, in Operation Joint Endeavor. The last NATO troops were pulled out of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2004. The no-fly zone, peacekeeping troops, and use of Implementation Force all became standard throughout future NATO-involved conflicts, as displayed later in Afghanistan. With NATO's first endeavor being somewhat successful after some initial turbulence, NATO learned what it needed to do to become an effective tool for helping countries around the world combat tyranny. While NATO was instructed and aided by the UN, the alliance later found its place in the war and helped contribute to the conflict's resolution. However, acting as an independent force, NATO would later struggle in its communications and strategy. Their success seen in Bosnia with the help of external forces would not continue in Afghanistan. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the United States, NATO allies and partner countries deployed military forces in Afghanistan for nearly 20 years. NATO wanted to ensure that the United States would not become a haven for terrorists. Since then, there have been no Afghan terrorist attacks on allied countries. Deploying in 2001, NATO led the International Security Assistance Force, referred to as ISAF, which was tasked to assist the Afghan government in maintaining national security, especially in the city of Kabul. The operation was initially run by individual NATO allies on a rotational basis, but NATO agreed to take command of the force in 2003. the UN Security Council was then mandated to expand the scale of ISAF to the whole country. To this day, ISAF has been one of the largest scale NATO operations. At the height of ISAF, more than 130,000 troops were involved, sourced from 50 countries. ISAF helped to improve governance and economic development in Afghanistan, increasing security in the environment. Over the decade ISAF took place, Afghanistan made the largest percentage gain of any country in basic health and development indicators, with maternal mortality decreasing and the rise of life expectancy. Millions of people then exercised their right to vote, eventually leading to the establishment of a national unity government. However, the deployed troops had to remain engaged in Afghanistan, even while there was no clear goal to work towards. Troops were finally withdrawn from Afghanistan after an agreement signed in February 2020 by the United States and the Taliban, a terrorist group controlling a large part of the country. The biggest shortcoming of this mission was the lack of established goals among the alliance. While there were many problems how the mission was executed and the strategic plans of the troops, the reason for initializing the mission remains unclear. The mission became endless and dangerous for the troops, resulting in backlash by many.
So is there a potential game changer now in the fight against Putin's army? The U.S. sending advanced rocket systems to Ukraine.
Russia is amassing troops close to the border of Ukraine. It's carrying out military exercises with Belarus.
And Russian forces are closing in on Kyiv with skirmishes dotting the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital.
The international community is working to address Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Oh, that's right. The NATO Secretary General will head to Poland and Estonia Tuesday as countries closer to the ongoing conflict express security concerns.
Today, a top Ukrainian intelligence official said Russia may have the resources to keep up its war for another year.
The United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power.
Recently, NATO has been involved in the intensification of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is not a NATO member, however it is an international partner, which means it cooperates closely with NATO, but is not given the complete security that is guaranteed in the Washington Treaty. In the Ukraine conflict, NATO has played a more passive role by supplying medical supplies and equipment. The organization has also served as a vital communication device for Ukraine, allowing allied countries to send appropriate military supplies and to answer Ukraine's request for assistance. This lets Ukraine stand a better chance of defense and is helping the country and its people every day on the battlefield. Additionally, allies are sending financial assistance to Ukraine through NATO, providing humanitarian aid and hosting millions of refugees. NATO is also helping to support the investigation of Russia's atrocities in the war through the lending of legal resources. Currently numbering 30,000 casualties, the conflict has been devastating to Ukraine's soldiers and civilians alike, prompting over 1 million civilians to flee the country. Ukraine has also asked NATO to impose a no-fly zone of the country. However, the organization has claimed they are not a part of the conflict. NATO's inability to fully commit to the war repeats their indecisiveness, which has led to past failures, and may determine the outcome of the conflict. After NATO's involvement in the Bosnian War, the future of the organization looked bright. However, the alliance didn't reach the same success in Afghanistan as it once had. In the Bosnian War, their strategies were directed by the UN, resulting in reaching peace among the parties involved. They had reached their goal of diminishing violence and conflict worldwide. However, in Afghanistan, the disorganized nature of the alliance bested them, and the result in a 20-year mission involving over 130,000 troops that weren't able to solve many problems. The mission never started with a clear goal to strive for, and this was ultimately their downfall. NATO has proven that it can be an essential resource in international conflicts, but many of its weaknesses have been exposed in other missions. When organized and put to a specific goal, NATO is more than capable of intervening in conflicts and resolving them. However, the alliance still has a lot of room to grow, and the international community will benefit from the support if they do.